Hey there, welcome back to the show. I'm Phil Vischer, and this is the Phil Vischer Podcast. I am here with Christian Taylor.
Hey, you're shaking it up. That confused me.
Christian.
How are you?
Good. And SKYE JETHANI.
Hi.
Woohoo.
I'm back.
I'm so happy to have you back.
Where were you last week?
Wilmore, Kentucky. Asbury
Wow.
University.
Oh.
There was a lot of interesting stuff happening there recently.
Is there Asbury Seminary?
Yeah, it's right across the street.
But you weren't at the seminary.
No.
You
And I
were
learned
at
that they are not, they're not the same entity at all.
okay. And they don't like each other? They fight?
I think they get along.
They
I
have-
hope they do.
Okay.
They're
But it was a
neighbors.
wonderful visit. Great people there. Thank you for everybody at Asbury for the hospitality
Did you tell them about our podcast?
and the Christian chicken with a pickle. Yeah, a lot of people know about the
They
podcast.
gave you Chick-fil-A?
They gave you
Yeah,
Chick-fil-A.
I did a chapel service and then some other stuff, and then we did a Q&A session with a bunch of students during
Okay.
lunch, and they catered in Chick-fil-A for everybody.
It's very Christian.
Yes.
Did they have Hobby Lobby table decorations?
I don't
to
know,
go with it?
perhaps.
Okay. Christian, you do not have a color on.
Little monochrome today.
Your
I wanted to fit in. I
your
was feeling left
gray
out.
sweatshirt, but it's fur lined.
I know.
like the fur line.
Thank you.
Not real fur. If you can't see, she's
It's
not,
faux.
not
Is it-
killing any animals.
Would it be true to say that you've not worn the same outfit twice
That's my goal.
on the podcast? You've been consciously
I
doing that.
consciously try to
Wow.
wear something different every week.
I've worn the same outfit many times.
Me too.
I know. My pink shirt, my favorite pink Lucky shirt,
Yeah.
that's been a repeat.
I'd seen that before.
Yeah, that's been a repeat.
Yeah.
But for the most part,
Variety.
I have to go buy new clothes
The
every
spice
couple
of white
weeks.
people.
Do you have anything interesting happen in the last week?
Well, no.
Okay. There may be more there than meets the eye, but we will
won't
believe
go
her at
into it.
that. Okay. I went to NRB, and when I left to go to NRB, we had one dog, and when I came back from NRB, we had two dogs.
Oh, gosh, I thought you were going to say you had no dogs.
No.
that really scared me.
I'm sorry. We had two dogs. We have
So
two dogs.
Buddy has a playmate.
Buddy has a little sister.
What's her
Buddy
name?
has a little sister named Keena because she's part husky.
Oh, how did this happen?
Pretty blue eyes. She's 5 months old. My wife and daughter have been wanting to, they like having two dogs at a time, which we had until our older dog died. So, and they thought Buddy was lonely, and puppies are so much
Buddy always
fun.
looks lonely.
Yeah, I know. He just looks that way.
Yeah.
He just
I call him
looks
the
He's got
canine.
weepy eyes.
He's the canine Eeyore.
yeah.
Except
So-
he's kind of happy and bouncy sometimes.
Sometimes. So
always at
I
my
was,
house.
I was at the Opryland Hotel, and I started getting texts from a rescue shelter of pictures of my daughter playing with a puppy.
Oh, wow.
And I, said, okay, if you two think you're up for this. And they do. My wife's having
How's Buddy
second
doing?
thoughts. Buddy, he's playing the role right now of the cranky old man. He's saying, "Get off my lawn and don't touch my stuff." That's where he is right now.
Okay.
It's like, no, that's mine. Get away from me.
Okay, he's
So-
like marking his turf and
He
making
is.
sure.
He is. We're hoping that he warms up to little Keena, and Keena is will bring you things that you
What-
don't really want her to bring
what
you.
kind of things?
Like a nice shoe
Oh.
of yours that she'll go into your closet and bring to you. I was reading the Bible at the kitchen table a few mornings ago, and she brought over to me our really nice universal remote control.
Our dog, when he was
At
we
least
got
she
him.
brought it to you.
She brought it to me,
We
and
got him-
not in pieces. It was whole.
We got Alfie when he was about a year old, so he wasn't a puppy so much, but he did eat my Bible.
Oh, wow.
And he
Really?
actually just ate the Gospels.
He just ate the
Yeah,
gospel.
and I had to preach that weekend. I actually brought my Bible up front because
your dog ate your
I showed
homework.
that they ate my homework, and,
Yeah.
he ate the Gospels, so I had to borrow
That's
someone
not
else's
funny.
Bible.
Keena, she likes to rip paper. Very fond of ripping paper. I don't know why that's fun, but so you have
It makes
to
a great sound.
You have
It's
to
kind of crunchy.
put the paper up high. Or any paper will get ripped. Okay,
Better watch out for your styrofoam.
Hey, we need don't we need a theme song?
We do. You
I
haven't
didn't
done
do a
that
theme
yet.
song. Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And we got video. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here. We'll talk to SKYE.
Hello.
And Christian, too.
I like how you said my name.
Thank you. We got no guest, but we're just glad that SKYE's back for you.
Yes, we are.
Hey, it's a podcast, so lend an ear. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here.
Nicely done.
Thank you. I'm just bursting with energy.
I brought Phil his late Christmas present. It's a chart of ukulele chords, new ones.
Nice.
So I can learn, because I know like 4. So then I could, maybe next week I'll know 5 chords.
You should practice.
Maybe I'll know 5.
I don't know if that's good or not.
It just seems
I
like...
don't know if I want more ukulele or less.
Yeah, I can show you what I'm learning. Sky wrote a story last week, a blog post that I tweeted. I actually tweeted it.
I tweeted it too.
Very good.
I
Thank
want you to know I'm helping you out.
Okay.
It's called...
I even put it on Facebook.
Well, now we're cooking with peanut oil.
Mm-hmm.
How Christians created Trump. That's
Right.
what it was called,
Yeah.
right?
It's a little bit of clickbait.
That's a little bit of clickbait.
clickbaity.
Don't you think?
But that's how the game is played these days.
Yeah, that is how the game is played. If you don't bait your clicks, you won't get any clicks.
If I had titled it something like a thoughtful response to Max Lucado about the pastoral authority in politics,
Oh, man.
nobody's going to click on that.
But you could have gotten it published in an academic journal.
That even fewer people would have read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you're reacting to Max Lucado's...
Is it Lucado or Lucado?
Lucado.
Okay.
I've met
Tomato,
him.
tomato. I've met him.
I've met him. No, I've met him.
I've met him
I
first.
have not met him.
I've met him more. I think I've met him twice.
I've read him.
My father-in-law is convinced that he's only written one book, but they just put new covers on it every couple of years.
Every year.
I shouldn't have outed my father-in-law like that. But
Yeah. So that's the end of his
All right, so how did
invitation to Max
Christians
Lucado.
create Trump?
Max Lucado came out and has never commented about politics, he says. As a matter of principle, he does not comment about politics.
Right.
But he had to comment because of the lack of decency he saw from Donald Trump, correct? Am I summing that up?
yeah,
right?
he wrote that piece on his blog, and I think it was put up in the Washington Post. But then he gave an interview to Christianity Today, explaining why he broke his silence on politics.
Yep. So JETHANI, you may be familiar with him, says that you admired it at first, then said, over the last few days, however, I've come to see an additional layer to Lucado's column. While I still applaud him for speaking up and affirm everything he wrote, I now recognize 2 subterranean qualities within Lucado's article that highlight wider problems with the leadership of American Christianity. Do you think Max Lucado even knew he had subterranean issues?
You know, to his credit, and I tried to make this clear throughout the article, I really like Max Lucado.
Yeah.
And I think what he
He's a
wrote,
nice guy.
he's a great guy, and I actually think he's a thoughtful writer and a wise
I didn't
voice
take
in the
this
church.
as a slam
Yeah.
against
So
him.
again, I love everything about what he wrote. It's just it's what was left primarily unsaid that I found interesting.
Right.
And it's not about Lucado. It's again about larger.
So you've got 2
streams.
subterranean issues.
Right.
One is fracking.
That is an issue.
No. Issue number 1, and this I did not expect to hear you say this. Pastors need to talk more about politics, not less.
Yeah, that should surprise people.
Well, and can I just say one thing? I was thinking about this on Sunday as I was sitting in church because I had just read this article. And I thought, what if my pastor gets up there and says, this is like shortly after the Republican circus debate. What if he got up there and said, you know, I just want to weigh in about what's happening in this political arena? I don't even know if I would have been like happy about that. It kind of seems odd that you would talk about politics from the pulpit, maybe because it hasn't
Because
happened.
of your church tradition.
Right. It's exactly because it's so
If
foreign
you're
to our experience.
African-American, it would be completely different.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They talk about politics in the really?
Yeah, we'll think about...
Martin Luther King.
Well, think about Obama's pastor in Chicago, Jeremiah Wright,
Right.
and all the trouble that he got in because he was so political. It's
Are
much
you
more
saying, though, that like not affirming one side or the other, but
Right.
talking
And that's-
more about...
In the article, I say there's a difference between being political and being partisan.
Okay.
Partisan is pro-Democrat, pro-Republican, anti-this, anti-that, one side of the... Most of the pundits on TV are partisan, or talk radio are partisan. To be political is to be human. And
What does that mean?
Here's what SKYE says.
There
Do
you
you want to hear what
I
SKYE
do.
says?
read it. Let's hear
I
it.
am not saying pastors should endorse candidates. There is a difference between being political and being partisan. Churches and leaders should avoid partisanship. But politics is an unavoidable part of being human and being social. It is simply how we organize ourselves into communities, from our neighborhoods to our national governments. Certainly, we ought to carry the values of Christ's kingdom into this aspect of our lives, and pastors ought to lead us by example with a Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other, as Karl Barth declared. Did he declare that?
He did declare that.
Did he know that newspapers were going to die?
Probably not.
And we would have to have our iPhones
Yeah,
on the
something
other
like
hand?
that. But
Which has our Bible on it, so it's really now just with your iPhone in your hand?
right, it's all integrated. See, that's the problem, is our Bibles and news are integrated, but not our discipleship. Think about
rich. That is rich.
So here's my argument. I think we have so hyper-individualized Christianity that we are very comfortable with pastors talking about the implications of being a Christian for our personal lives, maybe even for our family lives, but not for our social lives. Meaning, when you group people together into communities, whether it's a neighborhood or a national government, we think that we should keep religion out of that entirely. So why aren't we talking about gun violence in our communities, or gang violence, or drug abuse, or some churches are comfortable talking about abortion or out-of-wedlock childbearing or single-parent homes or divorce, but there's other areas where we're like, no, we won't go anywhere near that with a 10-foot pole, like
right.
Police abuse or education reform or prison reform or all these other things, which are social issues that engage politics that have massive gospel implications to them. But we don't talk about that because we've so privatized our faith. And same thing goes with national politics, like what you're seeing now with the presidential race. I'm not saying that every pastor every Sunday should get up there and give them their 2 cents on what happened in the debate, but we should be talking about issues like, is it moral and right for our country to torture people? And give Christians a clear gospel point of view on that, so that when a candidate advocates for torturing people, even when it's against Geneva Conventions, Christians will go, that isn't Christian, rather than 40% of them throwing their weight behind that candidate. So that's what I mean. It's the silence of the pastors and church leaders on important issues that leads to the problem.
Issue number 2, subterranean SKYE dug issue. You've dug these issues out from under Max Lucado's flower bed. They were subterranean issues. Mm-hmm. You've dug them out.
You really like this idea,
I like the idea of digging things out from under Max Lucado.
Apparently.
He made Hermie the Caterpillar, by the way.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, the kids video series, Hermie. And that came out of the ground.
But wasn't the voice like Tim Conway or something?
Tim Conway and Don Knotts were the 2 lead characters.
How about that?
Yeah, and then Don Knotts died and they had to replace him, but Tim Conway kept doing it. Issue number 2, Christians should be more focused on ideas than indecency. That's interesting. Max Lucado's article about Donald Trump focused entirely on the candidate's quote-unquote antics. He compared Mr. Trump to an indecent teenager unfit to date one of his daughters. True. Hard to argue with that.
Again, I agree with everything he said.
Lucado wrote that the concern of this article is not policy, but tone and decorum. Again, says this SKYE JETHANI, we should get him on the show sometime. Again, I completely agree with Lucado's assessment of Trump's uncivil tone and indecent decorum, but is meanness really Trump's disqualifying quality? Why not address policy? I am far more concerned with Trump's ideas than his indecency. What about his call to intentionally target and kill the families of terrorists? A war crime. He says the United States should torture people even if it doesn't work.
Then he recanted. But then he re-said, we'll just change the laws.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. If it's illegal, I'll just change the law to make it legal. Right. That's not despotism. He wants to deport over 11 million undocumented immigrants, a policy opposed by the National Association of Evangelicals and virtually every respected Christian leader in the United States. So your point kind of is, well, what about that stuff?
Right.
Isn't that maybe even more...
But then he would be talking about politics.
Well,
if he addressed those, then he would be talking about politics.
Then he's taking stands on political hot potatoes.
Right.
But here's the problem, and I address this further down in the article. I think that by focusing on Trump's bad language or rudeness or meanness, we're just perpetuating what I think is a huge problem in evangelicalism, which is all we care about is being nice, rather than actually substantive issues, whether we're talking doctrine or political issues or social issues or personal issues. The attitude is, well, as long as they're nice, as long as they're safe, as long as they're decent, as long as they don't smoke or chew or date girls that do, then everything's okay. Whereas beneath the surface, it could be rotten to the core. And I asked the question in here, what if Donald Trump were a candidate who was incredibly polite and decent and warm, but held all of these completely ungodly values and ideas? Would we raise a stink about that at all? Right. Probably not. So
that's
it's hard. It's hard to say.
I would, Sky.
It's hard to say because we're in such a uncharted water here that it's hard to say what we would do or think because. But here's the thing about the being decent. I get your point. I totally agree with you, just like you agree with Max Lucado. But there has got to be something said about the indecency and the incredible amount of, bullying and lack of decorum.
Well,
because
agree.
Here's the thing.
I think much is being said.
You have an adult male that's calling, name calling the other two people that are his peers, making names out of them, saying them repeatedly. If any kid in school did that, they'd be kicked out of school.
Okay, so I agree with you, as you know, entirely. But here's where I think we get into trouble. When the only time evangelical leaders speak up is because a candidate is being a jackass. And we are utterly silent.
You can't say that on my podcast.
And
that's a donkey.
And we are utterly silent about the fact that every year in this country, over 1,000 people are killed who are unarmed by police officers. Or we say nothing about the heroin.
People call us hypocrites.
The heroin that is rampant in our communities these days.
Right.
Or, that's the problem is we get all upset about people using bad language or being indecent, which, again, I would love a more decent civil society for my children and for myself. I'm in favor of that. But when we're silent on things that are killing people, literally, we just look ridiculous. We look like all we care about is being nice rather than actually tackling the horrific things that are happening in our world and in our country.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I think
so.
You're right.
I'm not saying don't talk about indecency, but let's add to it.
Let's expand the argument.
Exactly.
Here's a question, though. The fact that, maybe you mentioned this in your story, the fact that pastors are terrified to actually get into policy and politics, is that because they recognize that there's a growing gulf between what Christian leaders believe and what the masses believe?
I think that is part of it.
Time out. What do you mean by that?
In other words, you're the pastor and you want to come out against gun violence, but you know how much of your congregation, either members of the NRA or have become convinced that opposing gun violence is opposing the Second Amendment, and therefore, in other words, if we don't get our politics from church anymore, we get our politics from Fox News or MSNBC or Rush Limbaugh or...
And that's exactly my point.
Rachel Maddow, Mad Owl.
Or CNN.
And so, they try to be in the middle,
right.
kind of. So that skewed people further and further away from using historic Christian ethics to guide their policies. We now use Glenn Beck and,
But don't you think there's a huge divide even in the Christian community? I mean, you have two groups of people who are guided by Christian ethics or morals or values, and they can look at the same issues and be on the exact opposite sides.
We do. I mean, even in our church, we have very strong Republicans and we have very strong Democrats that would view each other, I mean, the only way to get along is to say, let's not bring it up.
Yeah, right.
Let's not bring it up. And that may be what pastors are saying.
Well, I think that is part of it. There is a widening gap between what a lot of evangelical leaders think and what, for lack of a better word, evangelical laity think. And nowhere is that more clearly expressed statistically than with immigration. I already mentioned in the article that the NEA and hundreds of very highly respected evangelical leaders all signed that NEA document about immigration reform, and yet when you poll what average evangelicals believe, it's more in line with what Trump thinks than with what the leaders think. So there is that gap, and it is because churches are not talking about it. And I've mentioned this on the podcast in the past. I've talked to church leaders who have very clear biblical ideas about immigration, and it's a huge issue in their immediate community and in their churches, and they won't talk about it because of exactly what Phil's said, is that they know the majority of people in their congregation are getting their views on immigration from talk radio, and they don't want to lose members of their church.
So what's the solution?
So let me read something, though.
Solution?
So I was just reading...
So depressed.
David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons' new book, Good Faith, and it's based on a bunch of research from the Barna organization.
Maybe we can have them on the show.
I think we're going to do that.
Awesome.
So they found that over 50% of pastors say they frequently or occasionally feel intimidated in their ability to speak about moral and social issues out of concern of people taking offense, and that 2/3 of those people are more concerned about people within their churches being offended than they are of people outside their churches. So there is this sense of, I don't want to rock the boat. We got to keep things stable. Let's not talk about anything controversial. And they quoted Ron Dreher, Dreher. I don't know how to say that.
No,
Anyway, this is a great quote. Listen to this. No church can be the church if its pastors and its congregation are unwilling to speak hard truths to each other and to themselves. To think of the pastorate as primarily a helping profession and the church as chiefly a therapeutic community in the sense of guiding us to feel better about ourselves as opposed to giving us what we need to be healthy is a betrayal of the gospel and the church's mission. He's essentially saying what I was trying to say in my article.
Those are deep thoughts.
Is pastors need to be more fearful of God than of their congregations. And when necessary, I'm not saying on everything, but when necessary, they need to share the social and cultural and political implications of Christian ethics, even if it means offending people.
So Christians used to put their lives on the line for the gospel, and now we won't even put our jobs on the line.
That's one way of putting it.
So I find this interesting.
What, Christian?
You're saying that here we have a congregation full of people that really don't want their pastor to talk truth about these cultural and political issues, right? And if a pastor steps on that ledge, he gets a lot of heat from it and, maybe
pushed
kicked
off
out.
the
Right.
ledge.
And yet, why is everyone in the country, apparently, so jazzed up about Donald Trump?
Not
It's
everyone. Not everyone
Okay,
is. More
well-
people dislike him than like him.
You mean
According-
jazzed up by supporting?
Yeah, according to Donald Trump, half the world wants him to be president.
The majority of Republicans do not want him to be president.
That's quite true.
Currently.
However,
Much less
there
everyone
is
else.
a very large evangelical base that are supporting Donald Trump. And not only that, Americans are clearly supporting him. He's winning the popular vote in all of these primaries.
Among Republicans.
And they are saying that the reason is he stands up and tells it like it is. He's not politically correct. And apparently that is resounding with people.
Yeah, that's the least of why people like him. Though he appeals to fears primarily. Because lots of people, all stand-up comedians tell it like it is. We're not grabbing them and saying, you should be president. I mean, Louis C.K. tells it like it is. They all do.
Right, but nobody
Chris
in the
Rock
political
on the Oscars tells it like it is.
nobody in the political arena talks like he talks.
Donald Trump is not in the political arena until, 9 months ago?
I saw a meme that showed Donald Trump and John Oliver together, and it said something like, the world's upside down where our politicians are where we go for comedy, and our comedians are where we go for
Ain't that the
for
truth?
political insight or something.
Okay, I got some more interesting stories about this because this is affecting, and it really is what's going on in the Republican Party. Headline number 1, Who Killed the Religious Right? This is by columnist Mark Silk.
This comes out every 4 years, just so you know.
No one died of natural causes. No, it does not come out every
I feel like every 4 years someone say, "Oh, this is it. The
Well,
religious right is over. Its
with-
influence has waned."
I
It's
think
da-da-da."
with the success of Obama, that's where it started.
Yeah.
It certainly wasn't happening during George Bush. The story with
Yeah.
George Bush was, wow, people are voting against their own economic interests because of the power of the religious right.
Right.
Okay. Maybe Super Tuesday put it out of its misery, but the thing was moribund, an invalid for a decade.
There you go.
So there you go. What happened yesterday was a mercy killing, talking about Super Tuesday, or better, candidate-assisted suicide. Here's the report from the pathologist. Number 1, the religious right lost its leaders. Jerry Falwell's dead. Pat Robertson, James Dobson, retirement. Ralph Reed has lost his way. Jerry Falwell Jr. endorsed Donald Trump. And Mike Huckabee has all but done the same. Number 2, it lost its organizational oomph. Once upon a time, the Christian Coalition littered evangelical churches with voter guides and had state affiliates that worked hard to turn out voters. Only in Iowa is this kind of thing still happening. Number 3, it lost its troops. 35 years ago, white evangelicals were on the rise in American society. Now they're a shrinking slice of the demographic pie. Number 4, it lost its president. George W. Bush became our Christian president. His failure was a serious disillusionment. And I think that is a pretty good point, that everyone was so excited that, hey, there's an evangelical Christian in the White House. And it wasn't.
I think all of these so far are good points.
Number 5, it lost its reason for being. The religious right was all about mobilizing white evangelicals to vote their values, most importantly on gay rights and abortion. When's the last time you heard a Republican presidential candidate talk about ending same-sex marriage or abortion? We've mostly given up.
Well, they still talk about defunding Planned Parenthood. It seems to be as strong as the rhetoric gets.
On Super Tuesday, white evangelicals were all over the map. In Alabama, Georgia, Massachusetts, Tennessee, and Virginia, they voted strongly for Donald Trump. In Oklahoma and Texas, they went for Ted Cruz by double digits. They split between Trump and Cruz in Arkansas, between Trump and Rubio in Vermont. And through it all, Russell Moore, chief lobbyist for the Southern Baptist Convention, calls out, "Don't call me an evangelical." Put that on the tombstone. Religious right, rest in peace.
Well, the fact that so many evangelicals around the country voted so differently tells you that the defining characteristic of their vote was not the fact that they were evangelical.
Right.
Otherwise,
other things.
Right.
They're either worried about security or they're worried about the economy, primarily.
Who knows what? But it's not that they're evangelical.
Or immigration, which is both. It's fear of the economy and fear of our security. Next story, this is from the Huffington Post. American Christianity is dying, and the Republican presidential candidates are showing us why. This is a column. The debates have been both eye-opening and terrifying. On the surface, they have shown that many, many people are furious with the state of the GOP establishment. But they have also shown that there is a constituency of hateful people in America that are starting to speak up in multitudes against Obama, Mexicans, Muslims, women, and black people. Yesterday, this is a week or so ago, Trump had a group of black students thrown out of his rally, not for protest or disruption, just for silently standing there.
What?
Were they were protesting.
They had signs.
Yeah, they had
signs, but they weren't making any noise. Let's be clear. We need only, and this columnist, who is a Christian, is saying, let's pull the plug on American Christianity. And I think their point is...
I think we've said that.
That American Christianity is something different than Christian Christianity. When American Christianity becomes about discriminating against minorities, hurting instead of helping the poor, oppressing women's rights, keeping out immigrants and strangers instead of welcoming them, hate spewing towards other religions, all the while accumulating wealth and power, it is time to let it go. We have so blurred the lines between Jesus and American ideals that we've used the latter in support of the former. This is my hope and burden, to find new life on the other side. We must not let polarity pull us to one extreme or the other. Loving God and our neighbor is lived from the center, beckoning all on both sides to come together. Our country needs more of that.
Well, we've said that.
Yeah.
See, we're way ahead of the game, right?
Many
Is that what you're
times.
saying, Christian?
And this is
I
where
am.
it gets even crazier. Falwell's Trump endorsement criticized by prominent Liberty University board member.
Oh.
Yeah, there's kind of an internal feud going on there now.
Yeah, so Mark DeMoss, he's not just a board member at Liberty University, he's the chairman of the board at Liberty University.
He's got a head of the school gone amok.
And the son
amok?
of the founder.
And his wife came after him.
Son of the founder.
Really?
He says he can no longer remain silent about college president Jerry Falwell Jr.'s endorsement of Donald Trump. Mark DeMoss says to the Washington Post, "I've been concerned for Liberty University for a couple of months now, and I've held my tongue. I think a lot of what we've seen from Donald Trump will prove to be difficult to explain by evangelicals who have backed him. Watching last weekend's escapades about the KKK, I don't see how an evangelical backer can feel good about that." Falwell Jr. responded by saying that the criticism from Mark DeMoss was puzzling and disappointing. I don't think it was puzzling. I imagine it would be disappointing.
Well, he was probably puzzled by why in the world the chairman of his board would come out publicly against him.
I'm assuming they've had private conversations before he came out publicly.
That did nowhere.
Yeah. And then Falwell's wife came out and criticized Mark DeMoss
On Facebook.
on Facebook.
Wow. That Facebook can get you in some trouble, can it?
But wait, there's more.
Oh, gosh.
But
There's
wait,
more?
there's more. Russell Moore. You know who Russell
There's
Moore
more.
is? There's more, Russell.
I don't.
Yeah.
He's the head he's the head lobbyist for the Southern Baptist Convention.
He's the head of the.
You just said that, I think, a few minutes ago.
We quote him fairly often.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
He's a good guy. He wrote a piece for the Washington Post that we mentioned earlier, Why This Election Makes Me Hate the Word Evangelical. And I want to read this because there's some good stuff in it. It wasn't even intentional on my part. I just noticed a few weeks ago that I'd stopped describing myself to people as an evangelical.
I'm surprised it was only a few weeks ago.
I had begun subconsciously to say that I am a gospel Christian. When I caught myself doing this, I wondered why, and the answer wasn't long coming. The word evangelical has become almost meaningless this year, and in many ways, the word itself is at the moment subverting the gospel of Jesus Christ. Part of the problem is that more secular people have for a long time misunderstood the meaning of evangelical, seeing us almost exclusively in terms of election year voting blocks and our most buffoonish television personalities. Crazy uncles. You know, crazy uncles.
I know those.
Many of those who tell pollsters they are evangelical may well be drunk right now and haven't been into a church since someone invited them to Vacation Bible School sometime back when Seinfeld was in first-run episodes.
So are we saying that evangelicals sort of like nominally Christian? I mean, they're synonymous now?
He's saying that it's become meaningless.
Right. Well, so has the word Christian for the most part. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah. The other problem is the behavior of some evangelical leaders. I have watched as some of those who gave stem-winding speeches about character in office during the Clinton administration now minimize the spewing of profanities in campaign speeches, race baiting, and courting white supremacists, boasting of adulterous affairs, debauching public morality and justice through the casino and pornography industries. I watched one evangelical leader pronounce a candidate a Christian, quote unquote, though he explicitly states he's never repented of sin, just because he displays the fruit of the Spirit in job creation. This is not a political problem. It's a gospel problem. We have been too willing to look the other way when the word evangelical has been co-opted by heretics and lunatics. This sort could deny creedal Christianity and gospel clarity with impunity as long as they were on the right side of the culture war. Evangelical is a magnificent word, a word that resonates with the gospel dissent of Martin Luther and the gospel crusades of Billy Graham. More than that, it is rooted in the New Testament itself that tells us that Jesus saves. And I'm not ready to give it up yet. But you will forgive me if, at least until this crazy campaign year is over, I choose just to say I'm a gospel Christian. When this fevered moment is over, we will need to make evangelical great again.
So he wants to reclaim the word.
Yes, but after the election.
See,
Why don't we just say follower of Jesus?
You don't think that'll even be possible?
I don't. I actually wrote a piece, I think it was back in 2008, saying the term is now ridiculously ambiguous and ridiculous. Yeah, and there was a paper written in 2008 during that election called the Evangelical Manifesto. Bunch of great people wrote it and signed it. It's a phenomenal document. You can look it up online. It's worth reading, actually. It's really good. But here's the problem. I think it was roughly half the document, which was, I think the whole thing was 8 or 10 pages. Half the document was spent just defining what the word evangelical means. And they do a great job of defining it, but if you have to spend half the time defining the word, you know that it's lost all popular usefulness.
But is it even possible, we've had this conversation before, is it even possible to come up with a new brand?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that word is definitely poisoned.
And you know David Gushee?
Yeah.
Gushee? David, Gushee. How do you pronounce
it's
that?
Gushy.
Gushy.
Not gushy.
Like that fountain is so gushy.
Yes.
Okay.
Or so are those gushers.
I like gushy.
Gushy?
Yeah. This gum is so gushy.
Because it's like good and squishy together.
Yeah.
It's good and squishy as gushy.
Yeah. Okay. He wrote a piece. It was actually a few weeks ago, but I think it's also relevant to the conversation about the term evangelical. He believes conservative and progressive U.S. evangelicals are headed for divorce.
I think they split up a while ago. Maybe it's just
Maybe
being
they're
finalized.
just separated and they've
Right,
got
okay.
They've been living apart. They've been living apart,
Yeah.
but sharing custody of the kids. That's us. We're the kids.
We're the kids?
We're the kids. American evangelicalism is fractured, probably irreparably. The split between two major camps, which we might roughly label conservatives and progressives, is comprehensive. It was hugely visible in the Larisha Hawkins case at Wheaton, which we talked about extensively. In other words, you had the side that said, she's saying that we worship the same God as Muslims. In one sense, that's fine, and let's try to be more inclusive and not make a big deal out of it. And the other side saying, you've crossed a line, and we have to keep the lines clear. We must defend the lines. And he's saying that right there, that's the tension between progressive evangelicals and
This happened 100 years ago. Between
What are you talking about?
it's the modernist
Larisha
fundamentalists.
Hawkins isn't even that old.
I'm just saying that these controversies, this divide between progressive, conservative,
Well, yes.
modernist, fundamentalists, it's just playing out the same problem from 100 years ago.
Well, it's like
Here's what's happened.
Let him tell. He's going to tell us now.
Okay.
100 years ago,
Can we go subterranean on this?
we'll go subterranean. 100 years ago, there was a divide between the modernists who said we need to, accommodate evolution and Darwinism and psychology and all these new anti-supernaturalism and social gospel became a thing.
Let's take more of the Bible as allegorical.
Right. And then there were the fundamentalists who reacted to that going, absolutely not. We're going to stick to the fundamentals of the faith. And it was basically accommodate to the culture or withdraw from the culture were the two options. And that created all kinds of headache and turmoil in the early 20th century until...
I remember.
Yeah, you remember. You're old. Until a group came along, symbolically led by Billy Graham, who said...
And Carl Henry.
And Ockenga and some of these other folks who said, this is ridiculous. There has to be a way to hold on to
a middle ground.
A middle ground. There has to be a way to hold on to biblical truth and
like what we're saying.
and be culturally engaged.
Yes.
And they called themselves the neo-evangelicals. Now the problem is
like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix.
exactly. They wear all black, sunglasses, dodge bullets. The problem is that neo-evangelical thing won the day. It triumphed in mid 20th century, late 20th century America until the point where everyone now calls themselves an evangelical.
Right.
Yeah, but when did we drop the neo?
I don't know.
I think the neo lasted for about 6 months.
Yeah, when it was new and then just became evangelical. Now the problem is we're back to where we were 100 years ago, where there isn't a middle ground anymore. And everyone's gone into the progressive camp or...
Yeah,
so can we call ourselves the neo-evangelicals?
But
Neo.
The neo
squared.
Yeah.
But progressive evangelicals aren't as liberal progressives, as mainline.
Y'all are confusing me so much, and you're making my brain hurt.
Because they still hold to the Bible, they still hold to supernaturalism, they still hold...
Yeah, but I get what you're saying, but there's still a sense of...
Conservative evangelicals still aren't as conservative as true fundamentalists.
Exactly, but there's still a rift there.
Yeah.
And it's widening.
So our conservative evangelicals, how you doing, Christian?
Okay, to make it clear...
First of all, how many groups do we have now?
Hold on.
Have just lay this out for me.
To make it clear for Christian,
17.
Here it is.
Please.
100 years ago, the divide was really wide.
Right.
And then they came along in the middle, the
So now we have
neo-evangelicals.
3 groups.
Right. And now there's a divide again. It's not as extreme as it was 100 years ago, but it's still that same, the poles are still pulling in those directions.
And so we have the fundamentalists, and we have
the modernists. That was 100 years ago.
And then...
They still exist.
And now David Gushee is describing this new rift as progressive evangelicals or progressive Christians and conservative Christians. Is that what he's labeling them?
Progressive evangelicals and conservative evangelicals.
So all I want to know is, what am I?
In other words, the word evangelical means nothing anymore.
Right.
So you could describe it in terms of schools.
Okay.
Okay. Modernist would be Princeton Theological Seminary.
Yep. Dallas Theological.
Fundamentalist would be Bob Jones University.
Oh, Bob Jones. Okay, even farther.
And typically, evangelical has been described as, well, that's Wheaton College.
Right.
But what you see, and this is what he's pointing out with the Larisha Hawkins case, Wheaton College is being pulled in half. So Wheaton College is standing on the line, has like a foot on each
either side
of a new divide.
And they're not allowed to stay there anymore.
Yeah,
that's the problem. And it's not just Wheaton College; it's churches, it's leaders, it's.
That was helpful.
It is. It's a very good way of putting it. But fewer and fewer people. There isn't a tolerance anymore for someone standing on that middle. You need to pick a side. You're either going to be more progressive or you're going to be more conservative. You're either going to be pro-gay marriage or anti-gay marriage.
Right.
You're either going to be affirming interfaith cooperation or completely denying it, and we share nothing in common. And that's kind of
okay. So here's what David
rift.
Gushee says about these two groups.
What'd he say?
Conservative American evangelicals are a majority of American evangelicals, a very strong majority among white evangelicals in particular. Conservative evangelicals tend to be conservative across the board. Theologically, they're strictly conservative and focused on doctrinal clarity and purity. The ascendancy of Calvinist theology has played a major role recently, with leaders such as John Piper and Al Mohler setting the tone. Morally, they remain unbending on traditional Christian understandings of moral values, with special focus on bioethical and sexual ethics issues. Franklin Graham as a key example here. He's the latest successor to the late Jerry Falwell and James Dobson. Politically, they're conservative and lean strongly Republican. White evangelicals vote for Republican presidential candidates at a 75 to 80% rate. Progressive evangelicals are still conservative by many religious measures. They are Christ-centered, conversionist, evangelistic, Bible-focused. Was that the quadrilateral?
That's
Did he
the
just describe the
exactly.
quadrilateral?
Yes, he did.
So he's saying they're still in the quadrilateral. Okay. They tend to center on the moral practices of Jesus and are less focused on guarding doctrinal boundaries. Morally, though usually traditional in their own practices, they tend toward a greater emphasis on compassion and eschewing negative judgments of others. Eschewing.
I like that word. I knew you were going to say that.
We have a new puppy, and he's doing a lot of eschewing.
It's fun to say.
He's eschewing my shoes. Politically, they lean independent or Democrat. They tend to speak the language of social justice. Progressive evangelicals are disproportionately younger and less white. Leaders include Jim Wallace, Rachel Held Evans.
He's old and white.
He is old and white. Rachel Held Evans.
He's young and white.
Young and white. Female. Lisa Sharon Harper. I don't know who she is. Yeah. Sung Chan Ra.
We know Sung Chan.
He spoke at our church.
Yes.
And some people left the church because of it.
Really?
Yeah.
I have a...
What?
You know my history with Sung Chan? Did I tell you that?
No, I need to hear this story.
I do have a history.
Is it a bad one?
No.
Oh.
And Brian McLaren. Conservative, although you would also put Tony Campolo would be a really good
another old white
example.
guy.
An old white guy who's
he's a
very
red letter Christian.
Progressive evangelical. Conservative evangelicals, this is really helpful. Conservative evangelicals are angry about abortion and gay marriage. Progressive evangelicals are angry about racism, sexism, and Islamophobia. Conservatives tend to accept a narrative of cultural decline. Everything's falling apart.
That sounds like us.
Everything's terrible.
It's the end of Western civilization.
Progressives tend to reject that narrative due to a focus on historic American racism and other sins. In other words, the old days were not as good as you're saying they were.
Right.
You know, tell it to a black person 100 years ago.
I heard you guys say that also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, conservatives are concerned about protecting religious liberty. Progressives are more concerned about protecting LGBT people from discrimination. Conservatives tend to be strongly pro-Israel. Progressives aim for balance or side with the Palestinian cause. And that would be the example of when we had Gary Burge on the show, who has sided with the Palestinians and
did
gotten
not like that.
a lot of blowback from doing that. In a 2008 book, this is David Gushee speaking, I argued for a category called centrist evangelicals, which is ironic because that's how I've been describing myself. And like people wanted to know with what's in the Bible, what's your theological bent? And I would say centrist evangelical. David Gushee says they occupy as much as 30% of evangelicalism in the U.S., but in the meantime, polarization has nearly evacuated that category of any serious and visible leaders of institutions.
Except for Phil Vischer.
Woohoo! The center is collapsing, and this 30% is moving right or left or right out of evangelicalism altogether.
I have a friend who I think would squarely fit into that centrist camp.
Yeah.
And felt like he couldn't stay there anymore.
Was your friend David Gushee?
No.
Oh.
Was your friend named JETHANI?
No. My friend.
Are you projecting?
No. And, no, he became Greek Orthodox.
Oh yeah, I have a friend who became Greek Orthodox.
But it was because of exactly what Gushee's describing here.
Oh.
And that's I am concerned. I am greatly concerned that those of us who are in that 30% centrist camp, there's going to be fewer and fewer institutions, denominations, churches.
It's kind of like political parties. Throw that in there.
That's what's happening. Is our culture is becoming increasingly polarized in every way.
This is bad.
And you can't.
I feel like I don't belong anywhere. And honestly, there's so many boxes I can't even keep track of them. Mm-hmm. And there certainly doesn't seem to be one that I fit in.
That's sad.
I would say I'm the centrist person too.
Do you know where we should go?
Where?
The island of misfit toys.
We should.
That's where we
Let's
belong.
do
the Church of the Island of Misfit Toys. Has anyone named a church
The
after?
Church of Misfits.
Well, certainly something has to rise up out of the ashes of this situation. I mean, at least there are three of us sitting here that are sort of in this centrist category, and certainly there are more. Maybe you should weigh in, listeners. Do you fit in our category? So, certainly something has to develop.
The problem is, and Phil, you were even talking about this. I popped into your session on Saturday at church.
Oh yeah, I saw you pop in.
And when you were talking about media, and it's the unthoughtful, loud voices that tend to get the audience.
Right.
It's not the thoughtful, moderate voices.
And that's because nobody listens to our podcast.
Because we came from an age where there was limited access to media, and so that access was highly valued. And so there was a tremendous amount of thought behind who gets access to media. Who gets to write a column in the New York Times? Who gets to write a column in the Chicago Tribune? Those were the only ways to have access. You couldn't just go on TV and say, let me blab for a half an hour. Who are you, Walter Cronkite? No, Walter Cronkite gets to talk, and that's it. And because of technology, there is now infinite access to media. So anyone can blab about anything at any length at all, and so the value of media, of access to media, has dropped near zero. It's like the lending rate from the Federal Reserve right now. It's near zero. Access to talk is as cheap as borrowing money from the Federal Reserve, and because of that, everyone is talking all the time. And you can attract an audience not by being thoughtful, but just by
clickbait.
Yeah, by being loud
and obnoxious.
And
fear-mongering.
And fear. Fear is always a great way to rally
putting
people.
Up interesting images.
Putting up pictures of kittens. Yeah, and it's so the thoughtful people, we're having this conversation over and over again. How do you attract an audience and be thoughtful at the same time? Because thoughtfulness is not rewarded. On YouTube or
certainly,
Facebook.
it's going to have to swing back around.
Is it?
Certainly.
I don't know.
Is it?
I really don't.
You honestly think it will?
Not. I think it could be a century-long trend, if not more, until there's such
until we destroy ourselves and there's no electricity.
Something like that.
And it's not only the end of Western civilization; it's the end of all civilization.
And we're all chasing down concubines with big rigs in the desert.
Oh, this is a great way to end the podcast. Sing us out of here, Phil.
What have we learned? Give us something. What?
Yeah, really. What have we learned?
I'm too depressed to sing.
Well, I'll take this from David Gushing. I think he's right. We do need to see thoughtful Christian leaders who are centrist, orthodox in their beliefs, but moderate in the way it gets expressed, rise up and rally people to a new, essentially what Graham did a half century ago. But it's a lot harder to do that. So It's not easy. I don't know how it gets done, but we need to see a coalition of those kinds of leaders come together and say there's a different way.
I think we just need to all start praying, come Lord Jesus, come. Maybe we should have a big, huge, giant rally where all the Christians come and we shout it in a loud voice, and maybe he will.
Come. Donald Trump is dumb, so please come, Lord Jesus, come. But Donald Trump is us. That's the end of the day. A leader reflects what people are actually
and that's
feeling.
The frightening part.
That's the scary part. That Trump is only who he is and has the popularity that he has because he reflects what is inside us.
Boy, that's a depressing thought.
I think of Donald Trump almost like a biblical plague.
Now that's a T-shirt right there.
That we brought it on ourselves.
That we've brought it on ourselves,
okay.
and that God is essentially saying, "Okay, if you want it, here you go."
I honestly thought I was like begging the Lord, why? Why is this happening? And I heard, well, you asked for it, you got it.
'Cause we wanted strength. 'cause we're kind of scared. Now we got a guy with orange skin and golden hair who says he'll lead us to the promised land where there's no Muslims and
Mexicans.
Mexicans. Thank you. And everybody's got a gun, 'cause shooting stuff is so much fun.
Until he changes his mind and we all have different fun.
So subscribe to Sky JETHANI's devotional, because that's the only thing that'll save us from an ocean full of hate. All right, thanks everybody.
Not so bad.
See you guys.
Bye, everybody.